चलिए भोपाल से ये तस्वीरें आप देख पा रहे हैं। आज अहम दिन, मध्य प्रदेश के आने वाले बजट पर आज मंथन होगा। सीएम कमलनाथ के साथ योजना आयोग के पूर्व अध्यक्ष मोटेक सिंह अहलूवालिया इस कार्यशाला में शामिल हो रहे हैं। और आपको बता दें कि इस कार्यशाला में बजट को लेकर जो 5 समितियां बनाई गई थी उसकी रिपोर्ट रखी जाएगी।
श्री अनुराग जैन to welcome our chief guest Shri Motek Singh Ahluwalia. Now I would like to request Principal Secretary Finance Shri Manoj Govil to welcome the Honorable Chief Minister Shri Kamalnath ji. I would like to invite Srimati Smita Bharadwaj, MD, MP Finance Corporation to welcome the Honorable Finance Minister, Shri Tarun Bhanot. I would like to welcome Shri Gulshan Bamra, Secretary Finance, to welcome the Honorable Chief Secretary. Ladies and gentlemen, we have gathered here today for a workshop on alternate project financing to discuss and explore the possibilities of new models of financing for public projects and schemes with experts and practitioners from India and abroad. I would like to invite the Honorable Chief Secretary, Shri S.R. Mohanty, to give us all an overview of today's program.
Kamalnath ji, Honorable Chief Minister, Government of Madhya Pradesh. Shri Motek Singh Ahluwalia ji, Honorable former Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission. Shri Tarun Bhanot ji, Honorable Finance Minister. Honorable Ministers from the State Cabinet. Invited participants from India and abroad. Ladies and gentlemen. On the directions of the Honorable Chief Minister, the Finance Department has organized this workshop on alternate project financing to give us ideas in the state of Madhya Pradesh. Madhya Pradesh has not really been new to experimenting with alternate modes of finance. I remember an incident about 2 decades back when the then Chief Minister, when he launched the bond BOT scheme for road improvement, just took me aside and he said that we need to build 1982 kilometers of roads. So when I asked him that how much of additional finance do you have for this, he in his characteristic style put his arms around my shoulders and had a deep laugh and said, if I had the money, why would I ask you to do this? So the experiment happened, roads were built and the bond BOT scheme kicked off. In the social sector,
वर्कशॉप में योजना आयोग के पूर्व उपाध्यक्ष मोटेक सिंह अहलूवालिया के साथ सीएम कमलनाथ मौजूद हैं। जो समितियां बनाई गई थी उसकी रिपोर्ट पर मंथन इस वर्कशॉप में होगा। तो मध्य प्रदेश के बजट पर वर्कशॉप का आयोजन, सीधी तस्वीरें हम आप तक पहुंचा रहे हैं।
Innovation was kind of jettisoned, and again the state fell back upon the standard funding from the budget. Some experiments were tried.
चलिए तो दीप प्रज्वलन के साथ इस वर्कशॉप का शुभारंभ यहाँ पर किया गया और तस्वीरें आप देख पा रहे हैं। सीएम कमलनाथ मौजूद हैं। इसके अलावा योजना आयोग के पूर्व उपाध्यक्ष मोटेक सिंह अहलूवालिया भी इस वर्कशॉप में शिरकत कर रहे हैं। जो समितियां बनाई गई थी बजट को लेकर, उन समितियों की रिपोर्ट पर इस वर्कशॉप में मंथन होगा। तो मध्य प्रदेश के आने वाले बजट पर आज मंथन हो रहा है। सीएम कमलनाथ के साथ योजना आयोग के पूर्व उपाध्यक्ष मोटेक सिंह अहलूवालिया इस वर्कशॉप में शिरकत कर रहे हैं और भोपाल से ये तस्वीरें लगातार हम आप तक पहुंचा रहे हैं। और इस कार्यशाला में आपको बता दें कि बजट को लेकर जो 5 समितियां बनाई गई थी उनकी रिपोर्ट रखी जाएगी। और हर रिपोर्ट पर सीएम कमलनाथ और अहलूवालिया समिति सदस्य और विभागीय अफसरों के साथ समितिवार मंथन करेंगे। इसके साथ ही बजट का खाका तैयार करने के लिए सरकार ने 5 समितियों का गठन आपको बता दें कि किया था और इन 5 समितियों की रिपोर्ट पर ही आज मंथन होगा। इस समिति में वरिष्ठ अफसरों को रखा गया था और इस बैठक में खास बात यह भी होगी कि सीएम कमलनाथ और आहलूवालिया वैकल्पिक वित्तीय प्रबंधन पर खास फोकस करेंगे और इसमें इस बात का ख्याल रखा जाएगा कि प्रदेश की जनता पर टैक्स का बोझ ना पड़े और सरकार का खजाना भी पहले की तुलना में ज्यादा भरे। चलिए सुधीर हमारे सहयोगी ज्यादा जानकारी के साथ फोन लाइन पे जुड़े हैं। सुधीर, बजट को लेकर वर्कशॉप का आयोजन क्या कुछ चल रहा है इस वक्त और किस तरह की रणनीति क्या कुछ होगा इस वर्कशॉप में?
देखिए बिल्कुल जो बजट है मध्य प्रदेश का उसमें विशेषज्ञों की सलाह ली जाएगी। ये खबर आई थी छत्तीसगढ़ ने सबसे पहले बताई थी और योजना आयोग के पूर्व उपाध्यक्ष मोंटेक आहलूवालिया के साथ में आज जो अलग अलग क्षेत्र के जो विशेषज्ञ हैं, अर्थशास्त्री हैं और जो बाजार को जानने वाले लोग हैं, अर्थव्यवस्था को समझने वाले लोग हैं, उनके साथ में राउंड टेबल मीटिंग जो है वो मुख्यमंत्री कमलनाथ ले रहे हैं। वित्त मंत्री तरुण मनोट उनके साथ में है। इसके अलावा प्रदेश सरकार के आला अधिकारियों के साथ में और मध्य प्रदेश के बजट में आम जनता हर वर्ग का ध्यान रखा जाए इस बात को लेकर यहाँ पर मंथन किया जाएगा। साथ ही साथ सरकार ने अलग अलग 5 कमेटियों का गठन जो है सीनियर IAS अधिकारियों का किया है। इससे पूरे बजट के रिव्यू को लेकर प्रदेश सरकार की ऐसी योजनाएं जो जनहितैषी ना हो, जिन पर सरकार की ओर से फिजूल खर्ची की जा रही है, ऐसी योजनाओं को बंद करने के साथ ही नई योजना जिससे जनता को सीधा लाभ मिल सके और जनता के हित की योजनाओं सरकार बना सके, इन तमाम बिंदुओं पर इस पूरे जो वर्कशॉप है इसमें चर्चा की जा रही है। और साथ ही साथ किस तरीके से मध्य प्रदेश के जो वित्तीय हालात है, जो इस समय प्रदेश के खजाने की स्थिति है, उसमें कैसे सुधार लाया जाए, किस तरीके से रेवेन्यू जनरेट किया जाए, इन तमाम बिंदुओं पर चर्चा की जाएगी। मोंटेक आहलूवालिया बताएंगे सरकार को कि किस तरीके से अर्थव्यवस्था में सुधार किया जाना है और मध्य प्रदेश की जो क्षमता है, खासकर मध्य प्रदेश के जो मिनरल्स है या फिर टूरिस्ट सेक्टर है या हेरिटेज है या फिर मध्य प्रदेश में जो संभावना है जिस तरीके से निवेश को लेकर बनती हुई दिख रही है, तो उसमें रेवेन्यू किस तरीके से जनरेट किया जा सकता है, ऐसी योजनाओं को बजट में प्रमुखता के साथ में जगह दी जाए। तो इन तमाम बिंदुओं पर चर्चा की जानी है। देर तक ये पूरी बैठक चलेगी जिसमें देखना होगा कि क्या कुछ मंथन जो है उसके बाद निकल कर आता है, पर लेकिन मध्य प्रदेश के बजट के लिहाज से काफी अहम ये बैठक मानी जा रही है। इसमें जो राय निकल कर आएगी उसके आधार पर ही मध्य प्रदेश का बजट तैयार किया जाएगा।
चलिए सुधीर, 5 इसमें समितियों का गठन भी किया गया था जिनकी रिपोर्ट पर मंथन होगा। किस तरह से सर्वे समिति ने किया है, क्या कुछ इस रिपोर्ट में किस तरह से मंथन होगा?
देखिए बिल्कुल सरकार की ओर से जो सीनियर IAS थे उनको अध्यक्षता में अलग अलग कमेटी बनाई थी। खासकर अगर बात करें तो मध्य प्रदेश में जो योजनाएं हैं उनके क्रियान्वयन को लेकर क्या सरकार आगे करे और वैसी पिछली सरकार की कौन सी योजना जिनको केवल सरकार के नाम को बनाने के लिए या फिर व्यक्ति विशेष को लाभ पहुंचाने के लिए योजना को शुरू किया गया था, वर्ग विशेष को लाभ पहुंचाने के लिए शुरू किया गया था और ऐसे में प्रदेश के खजाने को जो चपत लगी थी उसका नुकसान मध्य प्रदेश को उठाना पड़ा था। तो ऐसी योजनाओं को बंद किया जाए, ये कमेटी जो है पूरे माध्यम से इस पर रिव्यू करेगी। साथ ही साथ अगर बात करें तो प्रदेश की जनता के हिसाब से कुछ नई योजनाओं को अगर शुरू करना है, जो लगता है कि वर्तमान समय के हिसाब से ज्यादा जरूरी है और प्रदेश की जनताओं के जन कल्याणी योजनाओं को कुछ नया शुरू करने की सरकार की को करना चाहिए, तो इस समिति के माध्यम से उन पर भी विचार किया जाएगा। तो बैठक वर्कशॉप फिलहाल जारी है श्रवण और उसके बाद में देखना होगा कि जो बैठक के बाद से जो निकल कर आएंगे सुझाव, उन पर सरकार किस तरीके से बजट में इन पर अमल करेगी। पर लेकिन मध्य प्रदेश के बजट को लेकर इस बैठक में जो आने वाले सुझाव है उसके आधार पर बजट तैयार किया जाएगा, ये बिल्कुल तय माना जा रहा है।
सुधीर, इसके अलावा सबसे अहम बात इस बैठक की यह भी कि वैकल्पिक वित्तीय प्रबंधन पर फोकस होगा। इसके लिए सरकार किस तरह से काम करेगी?
जैसे बात करें तो इस समय प्रदेश की जो खजाने की जो हालत है वो किसी से छुपी नहीं है। ऐसे में सरकार के सामने एक बड़ी चुनौती है कि मध्य प्रदेश में खजाने में रेवेन्यू को किस तरीके से जनरेट किया जाए, खजाने को किस तरीके से बढ़ाया जाए और उसके आधार पर ही आगे आने वाली योजनाओं को तैयार किया जाए। तो मोंटेक आहलूवालिया बताएंगे कि मध्य प्रदेश में जो संभावना है खासकर निवेश को लेकर या फिर खनिज और संसाधन या फिर दूसरे जो संसाधन है उनके दोहन को लेकर मध्य प्रदेश में किस तरीके से रेवेन्यू को जनरेट किया जा सकता है, इन तमाम बिंदुओं पर चर्चा की जाएगी। और सीधे तस्वीरों में भी देख सकते हैं कि अलग अलग वर्ग के लोग जो अर्थशास्त्री हैं, बाजार विशेषज्ञ हैं, जो अलग अलग सेक्टर के जो लोग हैं, उनसे सरकार यहाँ पर सुझाव लेगी और उनके आधार पर ये पूरा बजट तैयार किया जाएगा। प्रदेश सरकार के आला अधिकारी, अलग अलग विभागों के जो प्रमुख सचिव हैं, उनको भी साफ देख सकते हैं कि CS, PS स्तर के अधिकारियों के अलावा जो विभागों के जो प्रमुख हैं, उनसे भी यहाँ पर चर्चा की जानी है। यानी कि
सुधीर, मैं आपके पास लौटूंगा और तस्वीरें लगातार इस वर्कशॉप की हम दर्शकों तक पहुंचा रहे हैं।
State budgetary space which can then be used for funding other priorities of the state government. I also welcome today colleagues in the Council of Ministers, Shri Jayawardhan Singh ji, Shri P.C. Sharma ji, Shri Prabhu Ram Chaudhary ji. I would like to welcome Shri Pallab Mohapatra, MD of Central Bank of India, our state's lead bank, and Shri S.S. Mallikarjuna Rao, MD of Punjab National Bank. I am happy to say that we have amongst us a large number of top level leaders and representatives from the banking sector, investment banking, international financial institutions, industry, implementing agencies and media organizations. They have come here from various parts of India and abroad and have devoted their valuable time for this workshop. PwC and SBI CAPS have assisted us in organizing this workshop. I welcome them all. और अंत में मंच पर बैठे सभी सम्मानित जनों का और मंच के सामने बैठे आप सभी प्रबुद्ध लोगों का मैं हृदय से धन्यवाद करता हूं आपकी गरिमामय उपस्थिति के लिए। जय हिंद, जय मध्य प्रदेश।
चले तो मध्य प्रदेश के बजट को लेकर आज ये अहम बैठक, बजट को लेकर वर्कशॉप का आयोजन भोपाल में आज किया गया है। आपको बता दें कि बजट को लेकर समिति का गठन किया गया था और इन समिति की जो रिपोर्ट है उस रिपोर्ट पर मंथन होगा। वैकल्पिक वित्तीय प्रबंधन पर इस बैठक में फोकस होगा कि किस तरह से सरकार के खजाने को आम जनता पर बिना बोझ डाले भरा जाए।
Montek Singh Ahluwalia, Finance Minister, Mr. Tarun Bhanot, Chief Secretary, all officers of the Madhya Pradesh government, and all those who come to participate in this seminar. I want to call it a seminar and I want it to be an interactive seminar. I'm delighted that Mr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia is here. I've had the privilege of working with him in many capacities. And I have in my career met many economists. Mr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia not only is an economist, what will you do with an economist who doesn't understand the economy? So he is an economist who understands the economy, and that is the most important thing. There are economists who do not understand the economy, and Mr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia with his with his large experience in engaging with various sectors of the government, including the role which changed the course of the country, the liberalization brought about in 1991 by Dr. Manmohan Singh, and thereafter the continued thrust towards transforming India by Dr. Manmohan Singh. I've been thinking of having such a workshop and seminar for some time. I'm conscious that I have no contribution to make. Let me confess that. I'm not here to make a contribution. I'm here to understand and look at the summaries which come towards the end of this seminar. We have been looking at the new challenges. The world has changed. The financial world has changed. India has changed. India's financial world has changed. We are today a country, the largest aspirational society on this planet. The youth of 20 years ago were a different kind of youth. Today's youth is a different kind of youth, with different kind of aspirations. How do we address these aspirations? This will be a challenge for any government. And unless this challenge is addressed, the youth who are going to be the future of this country, are going to be the builders of this country, are not going to accept this. And many times, at all levels, whether it's a governmental, whether it's a bureaucratic, whether it's a banking, don't recognize the changed India. The changed India, we have to accept. We don't only have to accept, we have to adopt ourselves to it and adapt ourselves to it. In a changing financial world, how the banks have changed. We are seeing the banks, instead of becoming financial institutions, are becoming, all over the world, are becoming IT powerhouses. Banks are dictating the development of IT, and banks will be big IT companies themselves also doing banking. That is what is going to happen in the future. So with these changes, how do we look at state finances? What are the new models of state finances? This is the challenge before us. New models of state finances, which are outside the limitation of the budget. It's been traditional. Budgetary resources fund everything. Budgetary resources fund everything, fund infrastructure, go about to fund public projects. This is been the conventional way. We have to get out of this. How do we go into unconventional methods of financing? How do we go into out of the box thinking in this? And most important of all is, how do we generate economic activity? That's the biggest index, not employment. Employment is one of the ingredients of economic activity. How do we generate additional economic activity? That is what is there. When we build a road, we have the Pradhan Mantri Sadak Yojana. What was that? Just not building a road. It was injection of funds into the rural economy. We have to perceive it from this point of view. That we are transferring funds into the rural economy by this Pradhan Mantri Sadak Yojana. It did also build a road, but everything was local. The mitti, the gitti, the labor, all that was local, and that generated substantial economic activity. What are the various methods by which we can generate economic activity in the state? How do we create an atmosphere? How do we bring in more investment? Investment is an article of faith. You cannot demand investment, it's got to be attracted. Investment has to be attracted. How do you create, how do you use your strengths? Madhya Pradesh is the largest tribal state in this country, has the largest forest area. We are mineral rich, but are we able to get the maximum juice out of our minerals? These are the things confronting us. How do we attract industry? We are logistically, after the GST, Madhya Pradesh is logistically the best placed state in the country with 60% of the Indian market around it. How are we going to use these advantages? How will the government use its resources to be able to generate this? In this we have to be thinking not for the next 4 years but for the next 40 years. So this is what I think crucial. We in the last 1 year went about on the loan waiver scheme. Why a loan waiver? 70% of the people in this country, people in the state are agriculturally dependent. They are not farmers. But the kirana shop in the village, his business runs, his trade runs if the farmer has purchasing power. If he doesn't have purchasing power, how will the kirana shop run? 70% are agriculture dependent. The bazaars in our blocks, in our tehsils, run on the purchasing power generated by the agricultural sector. So there was a lot of criticism. We have a lot of economists or whatever they want to call themselves saying this is the wrong thing. Some bankers also said this is the wrong thing. This is not the right way of doing it. It may not be the best. The best is what? To have profitable agriculture. You can't have the best, let's do the second best. That was my approach to it. How do we convert traditional agriculture into modern agriculture? How do we convert the dhoti and pajama farmer from a jean and t-shirt farmer? How do we bring about this revolution that he thinks this is also my job? I don't want to go and work in a company. I want to work in the farm. The future of horticulture is one of the biggest opportunities for Madhya Pradesh. Horticultural in Madhya Pradesh and is going to be a huge opportunity. It's my effort to make Madhya Pradesh the horticultural capital of this country. We are the largest producers of pulses, oilseeds, oranges, spices, gram. We are the second largest producers of garlic, guava, onion, green peas, green chili, black gram and maize. But you can be a producer. How do you create a market? How do you create the processing? This is what we have to be thinking about. And unless the whole chain is there, our whole agriculture in India, 20 years ago, agriculture strategy was a strategy to deal with shortages. Today the challenge in agriculture is of excess. The challenge in agriculture is one of excess, not of shortages. How is this going to be addressed? Are our mandis going to be able to cope with this? Is our Mandi Act, the APMC Act, in conformity with the changed circumstances? These are the things we're going to be looking at if we want to generate economic activity. And this is where our budgetary resources come in. What can we do outside our budgetary resources? Everything has been conventionally based on the budget allows this and the budget allows that. How do we remain within the confines of the FRBM? The FRBM came in when there was a different world. There was a different kind of economy. What is the sense of FRBM today? That's for you all to also think about. Does the United States have a FRBM? Largest deficit country in the world? The big economies, do they have a FRBM? So we are, I'd say, strangulating ourselves, throttling ourselves with some of the old ideas. And we are going to be looking at how we can deal with the FRBM. If it was in today's context, I would have never accepted endorsing the FRBM. Because so much has changed. The question is today, how do we supplement our budgetary resources? By what methods? Government has so many kinds of expenses. Our budgetary resources, with the new budget coming, there 14,000 crores, 14,200 crores has been reduced from the devolution to us. How do we deal with that? How do we deal with climatic challenges? Last year we had excessive rainfall. 8,000 crores is what we need to compensate the farmer. Where will that money come from? 14,000 crores is the reduction. 14,233 crores is as per the revised estimates in the budget this year. Where do these resources come from? So we have to think of new methods. How can the government come up with comfort letters to the banks? I've talked to some of the banks casually, saying that we have to make these payments for this, and what are the kind of paper you will discount, where the government will bear the interest. We've got to think of many new methods. What do we think of annuity? What do we think of hybrid annuity? Does it fly? And if it flies, in what kind of project it flies? What are the kind of concession agreements we need to make? We got so much of land in Madhya Pradesh. Why can't we give usage rights to people to do horticulture? We allot land for industry. Why don't we allot land for horticulture? So it is in these areas we got to think, but to think in these areas all will require huge budgetary resources. If we talk of allocation of land, we need to give them electricity. We need to give them water. That will be a budgetary resource. So I am delighted that from all sectors, from the banking sector, from finance, from the private sector, all of you are here. This is to throw up ideas. Not only throw up ideas, I would urge you all also to direct your own thinking into what is the changed India, what is the changed financial world of India. What do we need to do in our state so that we are able to build a Madhya Pradesh. A couple of weeks ago, we released a paper, our vision to delivery roadmap of 2025. It was released in this very hall by Dr. Manmohan Singh. What is our vision? These are the things. We are bringing in the right to for clearances. To give clearances, we are bringing in legislation which is going to simplify procedures. In 7 days this will happen, in 6 days this will happen, otherwise it's a deemed approval. In this, many areas, governance is going to change. I used to always say when I was in the government of India that the biggest reform we have to do is the reform in governance. We can do this reform, that reform, but the biggest reform is the reform in governance. And this just doesn't start with the banks, it starts with the Reserve Bank. I have no hesitation in saying that. It's going to start from the top and trickle down. And I do hope that this seminar helps us not only to come with solutions, but helps many of us to be able to think differently, to think innovatively, and to think out of the box. Thank you very much.
I'm sure your words will be at the heart of meaningful discussions today and pave the way for innovative ideas in governance and policy making. Ladies and gentlemen, we have with us today Shri Montek Singh Ahluwalia, Visiting Professor, Stern School of Management, New York, and former Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission of India. Shri Ahluwalia is one of the foremost thinkers on economic and financial policy in the world and has served for many years in the Government of India and international organizations like the IMF and the World Bank. In recognition of his service to the country, he has been conferred the Padma Vibhushan in the year 2011. I invite him to address the gathering with his words of wisdom.
चलिए, तो मध्य प्रदेश के बजट को लेकर ये वर्कशॉप का आयोजन आज भोपाल में किया गया है।
तो मध्य प्रदेश के आने वाले बजट पर आज मंथन हो रहा है। सीएम कमलनाथ के साथ योजना आयोग के मोंटेक सिंह भी मौजूद हैं।
Realize that just because you open something to the private sector in a world like infrastructure, where there are innumerable risks, regulatory constraints, you cannot just go and charge whatever price you like. You're not going to get private investment unless the government facilitates and encourages private investment. And that's not the case, for example, in hotels. If you open up hotels to the private sector, they'll all come in. They're dealing directly with the customer and the price is not regulated and whatever standards there are well known. That's not the case with infrastructure development. Hence, the government has to do something more. And I would say that when I was in the Planning Commission for the 11th plan, we gave a big thrust that we must jack up the role of public-private partnership, set some high targets, and interestingly, we achieved those targets in the 11th plan. Then when it came to the 12th plan, naturally we felt, well, we've done that, we must do even better, and we set even higher targets, and by then we ran into difficulties. So actually, the 11th and 12th plan, which is really the UPA 1 and 2 experience, tells you a lot about what's possible and also the problems that arise. Now, you know, as far as what is possible is concerned, let us be very clear. It is the way to go, and there are many, many successes. I mean, the airports that we built in Delhi and Mumbai, and of course one or two others, and hopefully in future even more, are examples of private sector activity in infrastructure actually doing the job. And let me tell you that when 1991 happened, many people did not believe that that kind of investment from the private sector in infrastructure would come. I mean, today it's clearly possible, but we've also learned a lot, and that's really what I want to touch upon. See, I think there are many reasons why you can go for private investment in infrastructure. The conventional reason is the government just doesn't have the money, and that is actually what drove us Although I think we should remember that even if the government had the money, there's a case for doing public-private partnership if you believe that the private sector will be more cost-effective in managing a project. So even if you have the money, you may get a better deal by working it through the private sector. But I'm not raising that point because I suspect that in our case, if governments had a lot of money, they would not actually go for private-public partnership, they would just go and do it themselves. Fortunately, in a way, they don't have that money, so what can they do? I think, there's a lot of work being done around the world on how can you bring investment into an area that is different from the market for cars or the market for lemons or the market for clothes and so on. And I think one of the biggest issues is that these are not areas where price is free. Invariably, the price that you can charge is actually regulated, and therefore the private sector has to have a pretty good idea of what it is going to be allowed to charge. These investments spread over a period of 25, 30 years or something like that. And if the degree of price regulation is not known, nobody will come forward and invest. So what kind of charge can be expected to be levied on the consumer is important. Now, the second point is that even when a charge is levied on the consumer, the fact is for a lot of infrastructure, not all, but for a lot of infrastructure, that charge cannot actually cover the costs. Nevertheless, the investment is worthwhile. And the reason for that is quite simply that the benefits of investing in infrastructure do not accrue only to the users of the infrastructure. I mean, when you build a road from A to B, you can't charge the entire cost on the fellows who use the road, because building that road opens up an entire new economy, creates many beneficiaries, some of whom may not directly even be aware that they're being benefited. So somewhere or the other, that cost has to be covered by the government. So the first point I think to note is that there are some infrastructure projects, like for example airports, seaports, etc., where by virtue of providing the relevant location, you can get the private sector to invest as long as you have a reasonably predictable degree of regulation on the charge, and investment will come. But when it comes to roads and so on, the user charge is not going to cover costs plus returns, and therefore the government has to put in some money. Now, even though the government has to put in some money, the critical point is that what the government has to put in is less than what it would have to put in if it built the entire infrastructure itself. And that was the logic, that was why we pushed for PPP, and we created a whole system to push it, and then it ran into various problems. We began to see how we could identify them. I don't think those problems have been resolved even today, but no doubt efforts are being made to handle them. So I think if you're going to do alternative measures of financing, one should have a good idea of what those problems are and some idea of how to handle them. Now, I think, for example, one of the issues that comes up, I mentioned already the uncertainty that might be associated with the charge that can be made by the investor. Linked to that is political risk. We've had many cases. Most recently, the government in Andhra Pradesh has basically completely cancelled a set of decisions taken by the previous government, including in building a huge new capital city. Now, whatever the merits of that, plus or minus, from the investor's point of view, I don't know how advanced they had got to actually committing money, but from the investor's point of view, one of the signals it sends is that, look, if you get into a public-private partnership investment, the chance that the decision will be revoked by a subsequent government is not zero. In a way, this decision imposes costs not just on Andhra Pradesh, but actually on all other states, and I mentioned this in my book. We should nationally think of ways where such risks can be mitigated. But maybe a state government can find its own ways of mitigating such risk. And critically, one of the things is that the procedures that are followed in choosing a public-private partnership project should be at a very high level of transparency, so that nobody can just loosely go and say, oh, there was something wrong. I mean, you know, we are running a system in which the best way of attracting any attention is to allege corruption anywhere. I mean, if somebody were to get up and say, this decision is technically wrong, and it would lead to a complete waste of resources because it's technically flawed, I don't think you'd get mentioned even on page 14 of the newspaper. But if you can say that there was corruption involved, headline news. So, I mean, you know, investors are not fools, they know that. So I think state governments need to consider, if you want to have alternative modes of financing, what's the best way of mitigating political risk? You know, in other countries, many different ways have been tried. And I mean, I advocated some of this when I was a deputy chairman, but it was towards the end of our stay, because it takes time to learn things, and it didn't get done. It hasn't been done even now. But you know, one thing we should consider is, should we have a law on public-private partnership? You know, I found that when we were pushing for public-private partnership, many NGOs viewed this as an abdication of the responsibility of the state. They viewed it as some kind of a fiddle. They viewed it as converting what should be a sovereign state activity into a contractually governed relationship between the state and a private sector person. You know, the alternative, many countries have done this. The alternative is that you pass a public-private partnership law, which clearly indicates the intention of the legislature that in these areas, we do intend to go for what is called alternative modes of financing here, but it broadly can be called public-private partnership. And you lay down some of the procedures that you're going to follow in going through with these projects. Now, one view would be this is unnecessarily cumbersome. The other view would be that it might provide an opportunity for anybody who has any objections to raise them early rather than raise them later. So this is one issue that I think we need to think about. You know, the other issue really is that I said that for some of these projects, the government cannot simply leave it to the private sector and not use any of its own money. Because if that was the case, it would be much simpler. But if you have a situation where somebody says, look, this road, which is going to cost X amount of money, is a very good idea, but there's no way that the user charge that you are going to allow us to place on the road, on the people using the road, would even remotely cover the costs. So you have to do one of two things. You either subsidize the capital costs, so I have to cover a much smaller amount of equity plus debt, or you subsidize, you give me a payment per user. I mean, if you have a road where you're monitoring how many cars go through, you subsidize per user depending on usage. That has the problem that if there's no usage, then the demand risk is being borne entirely by the project developer. You could do better than that and say, well, look, I give you so much per year, which is sort of your estimate of what you would subsidize if the traffic came up to expectations, and which also means that if traffic exceeds expectation, the private investor benefits. If it falls short of expectation, well then basically you don't get, he loses out because your subsidy doesn't actually cover the returns. So, you know, these are different ways, and each project, I mean, maybe you want different ways for different circumstances, but you want to lay out a whole template so that whoever's doing this alternative form of financing can choose which ones they want. This is related also to the concern I'm sure that any finance ministry would have, that how do you keep the commitments you're making within budgetary constraints. I mean, one of the problems with public-private partnership type initiatives is that they're committing the government to spending money over time. I mean, for example, if you're subsidizing the capital cost, let's say in the central government we had said up to X% of the capital cost with a competitive bid. So the bidder who wants the lowest percentage gets the project. That is done as the project is completed. So there's no immediate budgetary implication, but there is a budgetary implication over the next few years when the project is completed. That can be fitted into budgetary planning, because most finance ministries look 3-4 years ahead, so they know what's happening. But suppose you do it differently. You say, look, I'm not going to give you any money for the capital cost, but I'll give you an annuity for the next 20 years. I'll pay you so much per year. Now, any responsible finance ministry would want to know, how do I fit this into my budgetary thinking? Now, here you've got two separate problems. One problem is an internal one. That is, how does the finance department make up its mind and how much of these obligations to allow? I'm sure finance departments have their own ways of reaching the right solution, but that's something they can easily do. The other question that comes up is, how does this relate to the FRBM commitments? Now here, I think there's a lot of ambiguity. Because if a private sector fellow says that, look, I'm going to take a debt of 1,000 crores, but the project may fail and therefore I may not be able to repay the debt. So why don't you guarantee this debt? That is, if I don't pay it, you'll pay it. You'll guarantee either the whole of it or a part of it or whatever. Now that would be covered under the FRBM limit of guarantee. But if you simply take on the obligation that, look, I have nothing to do with your debt, you incur your debt, but I'm going to pay you X amount of money for the next 20 years, that is a liability, but is not covered under the FRBM guarantee, strictly speaking. So that gives you a little bit of flexibility that if you want to avoid the guaranteeing restriction on the FRBM, you could do it this way. My feeling is we need to rethink the FRBM also. Because to my mind, it doesn't make sense to be able to evade the guarantee issue entirely by giving non-guarantee, by undertaking payment liabilities over 20 years that are not covered. So maybe one needs to think whether the FRBM limit on guarantee, whether guarantees for designated infrastructure projects should be exempted from the limit. I think the logic of the limit is really that debt is bad, or debt beyond a certain level is bad. At the back of people's mind, the feeling is that if you're incurring debt for non-productive purposes, I mean, if you were incurring debt, for example, just to give a food subsidy, which the central government now is doing, because we're not paying the FCI the amount that is due, but we're letting the FCI borrow, so off-budget borrowing. But that is really something that should come out of the budget itself. But if you set up a kind of public sector financing company, and that company is doing some borrowing, it's not entirely clear to me that the limit in the FRBM on debt should be irrespective of the purpose for which the expenditure is being incurred. Now, a very orthodox finance ministry will definitely reject this idea, and I must tell you that when I was finance secretary, I would have rejected it. But when I moved to the planning commission, I had a different perspective, and it seemed to me that this really has some merit. And I can tell you internationally today, the consensus of opinion is that a single-minded focus on fiscal deficit is not particularly useful, because that does not distinguish between a country that runs an 8% fiscal deficit because it is financing food subsidies and a country that runs an 8% fiscal deficit because it's financing infrastructure. I mean, I have no doubt whatsoever that the latter is hugely better than the former, but the way the FRBM is formulated at present, that is not reflected. So I don't know whether the Chief Minister or the states have flexibility. Certainly the Finance Commission, which is sitting, has been asked to look into issues of state borrowings, and I think it'd make a lot of sense to make a representation to the Finance Ministry, to the Finance Commission, which says that, look, since it is widely accepted that whether incurring a debt is good or bad is not independent of what the money is used for, should the FRBM not be amended to reflect that? Even the central government may be quite happy to entertain that point of view because they face a similar problem. And you know, I have no doubt whatsoever that when people worry about our fiscal deficit, and people do worry about our fiscal deficit, they worry because they think the fiscal deficit is financing consumption expenditure, consumption subsidies, election freebies, populist expenditure, etc. If it was financing the creation of high quality infrastructure, I really don't think the worry would be of a comparable order, especially if it is part of a very clear strategy which says that, look, we want the private sector to do this. And remember, if the private sector were to do it on its own, it wouldn't come under the FRBM. But there is a problem of risk mitigation, and infrastructure is one area where everybody agrees that the government has a role because of risk mitigation. Now, I know that you have referred to a lot of papers in the document that I saw. And, you know, I would refer you to some of the work now being done on innovative means of financing in the face of climate change. You know, globally, none of the people who are very concerned about the fiscal deficit mind the use of innovative financing to support investments related to climate change. So already an intellectual groundwork is being laid to work out that when you want to push projects, money into desirable areas, certain types of innovation are acceptable. I think we need, in India's case, and certainly in the case of states in India, we need to extend that into the creation of infrastructure. You can debate whether certain things are infrastructure or not, but you know, I have no doubt that 80% of what we call infrastructure make a lot of sense. I mean, for example, climate infrastructure to combat climate change is a hugely important thing. Take the simplest, I mean, Madhya Pradesh, according to the Niti Aayog, does very well on the on water management. I think you're ranked third, whereas in most other dimensions you're ranked about 14 or 15. In water management you are ranked very high. Well, you know, you need to factor in what are the investments needed over the next 10 years given the likelihood of climate change. Now we know that the likelihood, India is one of the 5 countries that will be most severely affected by climate change. We know that. We also know that given the way the world is going, climate change is going to happen. I mean, nobody is observing, maybe we are, but certainly the big fellows are not. They're not observing the promises they made in Paris on mitigation. And what is worse, even if they did observe them, we know that the temperature increase will exceed 2 degrees centigrade above pre-industrial levels. So, whatever you may think about how to improve performance in this area, we would be well advised to recognize that climate change is here and we're going to see more of it. And we know that one of the things you will see is much greater variability in precipitation. That has an implication for how we manage water, and that requires a lot of investment. And I find it very difficult to believe that an increase in the fiscal deficit to accommodate such investment would be disapproved of internationally. I have absolutely no doubt that it will not be disapproved. So I think we need to be, this is not just a point for Madhya Pradesh, this is a point really for India, the intellectual community. We should make this point that we should simply rewrite the FRBM because it is not, it doesn't reflect what should be taken into account. We have an advantage that the terms of reference of the Finance Commission explicitly ask it to address the question that how should we look at states borrowing. So my limited suggestion is that states should be encouraged to set up systems which would enable borrowing to be used for PPP type activities in designated infrastructure. I mean, you can exclude luxury hotels, even though they're quite useful also, but you make it basic infrastructure, roads, rails, urban metros, sewage, sanitation, irrigation, water management, afforestation, those kinds of things. You know, there's one other point that I should make, and that is one of the areas where Madhya Pradesh has a great advantage is that you have a much higher ratio of forest area compared to other states. I used to say this, by the way, about the Northeast when I was deputy chairman, because, you know, this came up very sharply in the Andaman and Nicobar. That's not the Northeast, but sort of out there. 93% wooded, and when the tsunami came, lots of people got disrupted, and in order to relocate them, I mean, you needed to cut down some trees, but the environmental restrictions that were developed for the country as a whole made it absolutely impossible to cut any trees even in those circumstances. And those chaps said that, look, we're 97% forested. Whereas there are other states like Rajasthan which have almost no forest left. So you need differential treatment. Now, one of the ways of getting a differential treatment is to have forestry certificates which can be traded. Now, if you had a system where somehow you enforced